The day was October 11th. It was a day that started off in much the same way as a great many others for me, with my phone dying in the middle of the night and therefore having no alarm go off to wake me up in the morning. And so in many ways, October 11th would go on to be a very standard, unremarkable day for me. However, in one major way, this was a very remarkable day for me. You see, this day was also the Sunday on which I was scheduled to preach my first sermon at Faith. My routine for being at church by our appointed meeting time of 6:45 was to be awake by 5:30 and on the road by 6:05. On the morning of October 11th, I woke up and rolled over to discover that the time on my clock was already 7:05. As you'll recall, the first service begins here at 7:30. As you may or may not know, I live 35 minutes away. After I got myself ready and out of the house in record time, I plugged my phone into the charger, which I had left in the car, and called Pastor Jim on the way to church. While most of the memory of that conversation has been repressed due to fear, I remember him asking one thing very clearly. "Are you going to make it?" "No." "Well, see you when you get here." I have set multiple alarms on multiple different devices every Sunday since then. And so in a show that God does indeed have a sense of humor, today Jesus lifts up multiple times the importance of staying awake through situations in our lives and being prepared for encounters with God. First, we are told to be active, not asleep, in choosing the location where we store up our treasures. We put our treasures in heaven to ensure they can't be stolen or destroyed by our own inattentiveness. Next, we're told to be constantly alert, night and day, like slaves waiting for their master, to be ready for that exact moment when God knocks so we are instantly able to throw open the door and meet God. Finally, we're informed that it will be like a thief in the night when God comes. So we have to be eternally prepared to intercept God whenever that moment comes. Regardless of whatever the situations and the hour of our life at that moment, we must be prepared. And so if we simply practice constant vigilance and don't let our phones die, we'll be fully ready and prepared to encounter Jesus. And yet our phones do die. Even our high-tech security systems occasionally miss an unwanted intrusion that they are programmed to detect. Does it seem to anyone else that Jesus is setting the bar a little too high here? And so maybe if we didn't have anything else to do but sit around and wait for Jesus, maybe that would be possible. But I invite you to think about your lives for a second. Does the term hustle and bustle ever apply? Do you ever feel like you are constantly moving yourself or those who depend on you from place to place, activity to activity? What about when someone asks you, "How are you doing?" Do you ever respond with the simple, "I'm busy"? Because if you said more than that, you might have to admit vulnerability and that you're beginning to feel a little overwhelmed. And all that's before considering our 24-hour news and information cycle, where if you miss a story the day it comes out and try and talk about it the next day, nobody cares. The world has already moved on, so monitoring the news requires constant vigilance in order to stay up to date. We're already paying constant attention to our schedules, appointments, bill payments, social engagements, presidential campaigns, and the list goes on and on. So in the midst of all that, how do we find time to listen out for the soft and subtle knocking of God? When I become frustrated with how full my calendar is getting, I think that same thought. And then I'm reminded, why does God's knocking have to be in addition to all that? Why can't God's arrival be found in and with all those other things that we occupy our time with? Jesus did not tell the stories in our gospel today to warn us of God's coming as some one-time event that we need to be constantly on the lookout for. Jesus isn't suggesting that there will be one time when God shows up, and if that happens when we're asleep or distracted or whatever, then we are going to miss out on the promises that God has for us. No. We hear these stories from Jesus so that our everyday lives become more fully connected with our anticipation of finding God among us. So that in the midst of our hustle and our bustle, we do notice that God is there. And we can begin to see the many and various ways that God does appear to us. In the midst of fear, mistrust, division among people based on race or religion, God has appeared like a thief in the night and has kindled a passion within a few people that has grown into an opportunity for solidarity. In the midst of sadness, hopelessness, and despair, God has appeared as the soft knock in the middle of the night through the phone call of a friend to check in on you, or perhaps to surprise you with some unexpectedly good news. In the midst of doubt and uncertainty and fear of the future, God has appeared in the form of a new idea, quietly nudging us to remind us just where our true treasure is stored. Or perhaps more likely, God has appeared in the form of a crying child during worship, reminding us that we get a glimpse of that treasure now, and that there is a future of the church. Our God is a God who is constantly with us, and yet sometimes the busyness of our lives do overshadow our perceptions of God's presence among us. So what happens when, not if, when it does happen that we are deep asleep and miss the thief in the night, or the master's soft knock at the door? It is fortunate for us that we have seen that the grace and forgiveness of God expand beyond any mistake, any inattentiveness that we as humans can conjure up. In Jesus' greatest hour of need, 10 chapters after our gospel for today, Jesus is praying on the Mount of Olives. And when he returns to his disciples, he finds them all asleep. Jesus is about to undergo death on the cross for the sake of all people, and he returns to find those closest to him in the exact state he spoke to them about 10 chapters before. The master had literally come to them and not found them alert. And so not only were they not punished as we might expect them to be, but it ended up being these sleepy-headed disciples who would go on to found the church and help countless others begin to see the presence of God in their own lives. And so it is that grace and forgiveness which allowed my tenure at Faith to continue beyond October 11th. It is that grace and forgiveness which God continues to promise to you when you miss the soft knocking of God at your own door. And when you show that grace and forgiveness to someone else, you are the one being the hand of God, knocking on the door to someone else's life. We won't catch them all the times that God appears to us in the busyness of our lives. But the more we allow our hearts to be open to experiencing God in our midst, the more we learn from those instances where we do sleep through our alarms, the more we marvel at how truly life-changing God's action on the cross is for us. We realize that God doesn't expect us to catch them all. And even knowing that, it is still our Father's good pleasure to give us the kingdom, one soft knock at a time. And now I'll cast off the role of preacher and just come say goodbye to you as me. And I want to say thank you. Thank you for welcoming me into the midst of this congregation and trusting me with this place, which is so important to you, as I have seen time and time again this year. Thank you for teaching me and allowing me to be part of so many different ministries here at Faith and allowing me to grow with you, and occasionally allowing me to teach you as well. And thank you for loving me, for making me feel welcome here, and that what I do during this year truly matters, not just to me, but to all of us. And so I'll end and leave you with the refrain of my favorite hymn, which I will speak, not sing. From Earth and All Stars, it goes, God has done marvelous things. I too sing praises with a new song. I truly believe that this past year is one of those marvelous things that God has done, and I pray you feel the same. And as I go on, I will sing a new song, and you too sing a new song here. Not a better one, not a worse one, but a new one. And in the midst of that song, I will remember, and I hope you remember as well, all of the marvelous things that God has done this year, and I will treasure them forever. Amen.